They say you never truly know someone until money enters the equation. I learned this truth at 73 years old, when my own daughter tried to destroy me. My name is William Hartford, and for 50 years I built an empire from nothing. I started with a single hardware store in 1975, working 16-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the back room, eating canned beans heated on a hot plate. My wife Margaret stood by me through those lean years, working as a schoolteacher while I poured every cent into the business. When our daughter Victoria was born in 1978, I promised myself she would never know the poverty I had endured as a child. I kept that promise too well. By the time Victoria was 10, Hartford Hardware had expanded to 15 locations across 3 states. By the time she was 20, we had gone public, and I had diversified into real estate and manufacturing. By the time she was 35, I was worth $42 million, every penny earned through sweat, sacrifice, and shrewd business decisions. Margaret passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer took her in 4 months, so fast I barely had time to process what was happening. Victoria seemed devastated, weeping at the funeral, holding my hand as they lowered her mother into the ground. I thought grief had brought us closer. I thought, in those dark months, that at least I still had my daughter. I was a fool. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember because it was the anniversary of my first store's opening, and I had invited Victoria and her husband Damien to dinner at my estate to celebrate. I had cooked Margaret's famous pot roast, trying to recreate a tradition my wife had maintained for decades. Victoria arrived late, as usual, Damien trailing behind her like an afterthought. My son-in-law had always been a weak man, the type who married into money and then resented his benefactor for it. He worked in middle management at one of my companies, a position I had given him more as a favor to Victoria than any recognition of his minimal talents. "Sorry we're late, Dad," Victoria said, not sounding sorry at all. She kissed my cheek with the perfunctory affection of someone checking off a social obligation. Traffic was terrible. Traffic in our small Montana town was never terrible, but I let it slide. I was trying to maintain peace, to honor Margaret's memory by keeping our small family together. Dinner was strained. Victoria picked at her food, checking her phone repeatedly. Damien drank too much wine and said too little. I tried to reminisce about the early days, about how Margaret and I had worked side by side, but Victoria seemed impatient, distracted. "Dad, we need to talk about something," she finally said, setting down her fork with a decisive clink. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "It's about your health. Damien and I have been worried about you." I frowned. I had never felt better. At 73, I still worked 4 days a week, played golf twice a week, and had the energy of a man 20 years younger. "Worried about what?" "I just had my physical last month. Doctor said I'm healthier than most 50-year-olds. Victoria exchanged a glance with Damien. It was a quick look, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was calculation in that glance, a shared secret. "It's not your physical health we're worried about," she said slowly. "It's your mental state. You've been acting differently since Mom died." "Differently how?" "Forgetful. Confused. Last month you called me by Mom's name twice." I had done that, it was true. In moments of distraction, missing Margaret so acutely it felt like a physical wound, her name had slipped out instead of Victoria's. It was grief, not dementia. "That's just missing your mother," I said. "Nothing more." "And what about the business decisions?" Damien interjected, speaking up for the first time. His voice had an edge to it, an eagerness that disturbed me. "You've been making some questionable calls lately. The board has noticed." "The board works for me," I said coldly. "And I haven't made any questionable decisions. Last quarter was our strongest in 3 years. Dad, we're not attacking you," Victoria said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. "We just think maybe it's time to consider stepping back. Enjoy your retirement. You've earned it." There it was. The real agenda, dressed up as concern. I'm not ready to retire. But Dad, I said I'm not ready. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I built this company from nothing. I'm not walking away while I still have good years left. The dinner ended shortly after that, the pot roast growing cold on our plates, Margaret's tradition dying with the conversation. As I watched Victoria and Damien leave, I noticed them talking in low, urgent voices by their car. Victoria looked back at the house, at me standing in the lit doorway, and her expression was one I had never seen before. It was the look of someone sizing up an obstacle to be removed. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study, the room where I had made the decisions that built my empire, and replayed the evening in my mind. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I opened my laptop and began doing what I do best, investigating. I started with the company records, looking for any irregularities, any signs of the questionable decisions Damien had mentioned. I found nothing because there was nothing to find. Every decision I had made was sound, every investment carefully considered and profitable. But then I decided to look deeper. I accessed the employee records and pulled up Damien's file. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Damien had received a promotion I hadn't approved. He had gone from middle management to senior vice president of operations, with a salary increase of $200,000 and stock options worth another $500,000. The approval signature was mine, but I had never signed that document. I would never have signed it. Someone had forged my signature. I spent the rest of the night digging deeper, finding more threads to pull. There were other signatures that looked like mine but felt wrong, documents I had no memory of approving. Small things at first, easy to miss in the daily avalanche of paperwork that crossed my desk. But they were there. Someone was slowly, methodically preparing something. I just didn't know what yet. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Thomas Brennan. Tom had been with me for 30 years, had handled everything from my first business loan to Margaret's estate. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was him. Tom, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. Of course, William. What's going on? I need you to audit all documents with my signature from the past 6 months. I think someone might be forging my name on company paperwork. There was a long pause. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any idea who? I have suspicions, but I want to be sure before I make any moves. Can you do this quietly? I'll handle it personally. Give me a week. I threw myself into work that week, but I was watching now, really watching. I noticed things I had overlooked before. Victoria had started attending more board meetings, something she had rarely done in the past. She had always been content to be a passive shareholder, enjoying the dividends without involving herself in the actual business. Now she was there, asking questions, making suggestions, positioning herself. I also noticed she had grown close to several board members, particularly Edward Chin and Patricia Morrison, 2 directors who had always been somewhat lukewarm toward me. I saw them having lunch together, heads bent in private conversation. I saw the way they looked at me during meetings now, with a kind of pitying concern that made my skin crawl. On Thursday, I received a call from my primary care physician, Dr. Sanders. William, I need you to come in for some follow-up tests. Follow-up? I just had my physical last month. You said everything was fine. I know, but I've been reviewing your results again, and there are some cognitive markers that concern me. I'd like to do a more comprehensive neurological evaluation. Cognitive markers? You never mentioned anything about that during my appointment. I must have overlooked them initially. These things can be subtle. Something in his voice was off. Dr. Sanders was one of the most meticulous physicians I knew. He didn't overlook things. Who asked you to call me, doctor? I don't know what you mean. Was it my daughter? Did Victoria contact you? Another pause, longer this time. Victoria called me last week. She expressed concerns about your mental state. As your physician, I have a duty to take such concerns seriously, especially when they come from family members. And what exactly did she tell you? That you've been increasingly forgetful, confused, making poor decisions. She mentioned you've been calling her by your late wife's name, that you've been having trouble with basic tasks. None of that is true. I called her by her mother's name twice because I was grieving. That's not a symptom of dementia, it's a symptom of loss. William, I understand you're upset, but did Victoria ask you to run these specific tests? The silence that followed was my answer. I'll come in for your tests, doctor, but I'll also be seeking a second opinion from a physician my daughter hasn't contacted. I hung up before he could respond. The pieces were coming together now, forming a picture that made me feel sick. Victoria wasn't just concerned about my health. She was building a case, manufacturing evidence of incompetence, laying the groundwork for something much worse than forced retirement. She was trying to have me declared mentally unfit. Tom called me that Friday afternoon, his voice tight with tension. William, we need to meet. Not at your office. Somewhere private. We met at a coffee shop 40 miles outside of town, a dingy place where no one would recognize us. Tom looked like he hadn't slept. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I found 17 documents with forged signatures. All of them within the past 4 months. They're good forgeries, good enough that they might hold up under casual scrutiny, but they're not yours. The pressure points are wrong, the pen strokes too consistent. What kind of documents? Financial transfers, mostly. Small amounts at first, 50,000 here, 75,000 there, all to various consulting firms and expense accounts. They total about $2.3 million. $2.3 million? I felt like I'd been punched. Where did the money go? That's the thing. The consulting firms are shells. They don't actually exist. The money disappears into offshore accounts. I haven't been able to trace where it ends up, but I have my suspicions. Victoria. Tom nodded grimly. There's more. I did some digging into the board members Victoria's been spending time with. Edward Chin is heavily in debt. His wife's medical bills from her cancer treatment have nearly bankrupted him. Patricia Morrison's son is facing embezzlement charges, and she's been liquidating assets to pay for his legal defense. They're vulnerable. She's buying their loyalty. Or blackmailing them. I'm not sure which yet. Tom leaned forward. William, there's something else. I heard through the grapevine that Victoria has been consulting with eldercare attorneys. Specifically, attorneys who specialize in guardianship and conservatorship cases. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. A conservatorship. That's what she was planning. If she could have me declared mentally incompetent, she could petition the court for control over my finances, my business, my entire life. I would become a prisoner in my own home, watched over by nurses and handlers, while Victoria dismantled everything I had built and transferred my fortune into her own accounts. And the forged documents would serve a dual purpose: evidence of my supposed cognitive decline, my inability to manage my own affairs, while simultaneously draining my accounts and enriching her. How long do I have? I asked. I don't know. If she files for an emergency conservatorship, claiming you're in immediate danger of financial exploitation or self-harm, she could have a hearing scheduled within weeks. And William, with the right expert witnesses, a sympathetic judge, and board members willing to testify about your erratic behavior, she might win. I sat back in the booth, my mind racing. I had built a fortune through careful planning and strategic thinking. Now I needed to apply those same skills to saving myself. Tom, I need you to do something for me. Keep investigating, but don't let anyone know what you're finding. I need more evidence before I make my move. What are you planning? I'm planning to survive. And then I'm planning to make sure my daughter regrets the day she decided to betray me. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the part Victoria wanted me to play. I acted slightly more forgetful, a little more confused. I asked repeated questions at board meetings, seemed uncertain about decisions I had already made. It killed me to appear weak, to see the satisfied glances between Victoria and her co-conspirators, but I needed them confident, comfortable, convinced their plan was working. Meanwhile, I was building my own case. I hired a private investigator named Sarah Chin, no relation to board member Edward Chin. Sarah was ex-FBI, a specialist in white-collar crime, and she was very, very good at her job. I gave her everything Tom had found and told her to dig deeper. She delivered her first report 2 weeks later, and it was damning. Victoria had indeed been embezzling money through the forged documents, but that was just the beginning. She had also been manipulating company stock, using insider information to make trades through shell corporations registered in Damien's name. She had been systematically undermining profitable contracts I had negotiated, replacing them with inferior agreements with companies she had financial stakes in. She had been bleeding my company dry, bit by bit, while making it look like my mismanagement was to blame. The total damage was close to $8 million. But the worst discovery was yet to come. Sarah found emails. Victoria had been careless, conducting much of her conspiracy through her company email account, apparently believing I was too confused to ever think of checking. The emails laid out the entire plan in brutal detail. One email to Damien, dated 3 months before Margaret's death. "Once Mom is gone, it'll be easier. Dad will be vulnerable, grieving. That's when we make our move. I've already been talking to Patricia and Edward about supporting a competency evaluation. We need to establish a pattern of decline." An email to Patricia Morrison, 2 months after Margaret's funeral. "The forged documents are working perfectly. The handwriting expert I hired in Seattle is very talented. Dad hasn't noticed a thing. By the time we file for conservatorship, we'll have established a clear pattern of financial mismanagement that the court can't ignore." An email to Edward Chen from just last week. "The doctor's appointment is scheduled. I've already primed Sanders to find cognitive markers. Between his medical opinion and the board's testimony about Dad's erratic behavior, we should have enough for an emergency hearing. I'm thinking we file in 2 weeks, right after the quarterly board meeting. Dad should be committed to a care facility by May at the latest." Committed to a care facility? She wasn't just planning to take my money and my company. She was planning to lock me away, to imprison me in some sterile nursing home where I would rot away while she spent my fortune. I sat in my study that night, reading and rereading those emails, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest. This wasn't just greed. This was cruelty. This was my daughter, the girl I had raised, who had sat on my knee and told me she loved me, who I had walked down the aisle on her wedding day, actively plotting to destroy me. Margaret would have been heartbroken. Maybe it was a blessing she hadn't lived to see this. I called Tom and Sarah to my house for a late-night meeting. I had my chef, Carlos, prepare coffee and sandwiches. Carlos had worked for me for 15 years, and I trusted him completely. I would need people I could trust in the days ahead. "I have everything I need to stop her," I said, spreading the evidence across my desk. "The forged documents, the embezzlement, the insider trading, the emails. If I go to the police, Victoria and Damien will both go to prison." "So why haven't you?" Sarah asked. "Because I want to understand something first. I want to know why. I need to look my daughter in the eye and hear her explain how she justified this to herself." Tom shook his head. "William, confronting her could be dangerous. If she knows you're onto her, she might accelerate her plans. File for the conservatorship immediately, before you can counter. Let her try. I have copies of everything stored in 3 separate locations, including with my new attorney in Seattle. If anything happens to me, if I'm suddenly declared incompetent or have an unfortunate accident, all of this goes to the FBI and the SEC immediately." "You really think she'd hurt you?" Tom looked horrified. "I think she's capable of almost anything at this point. But she's also my daughter, and before I destroy her life, I need to hear her say it. I need to hear her admit what she's done." I arranged a dinner at my estate for the following Friday. I told Victoria it was important, that I wanted to discuss the future of the company, my retirement plans. She agreed eagerly, probably thinking I was about to make her plan easier by voluntarily stepping down. I spent that week preparing. I had security cameras installed throughout the house, hidden devices that would record everything. I had Sarah and 2 of her associates on standby, ready to intervene if things went wrong. I made sure every piece of evidence was documented, notarized, and secured. And I called my granddaughter Emily. Emily was Victoria's daughter from her first marriage, a brief union in her early 20s that had ended in divorce. Emily was 20 now, a college student studying environmental science, and she was the only member of my immediate family who still felt like family. She visited me regularly, called to check on me, seemed to genuinely care about me as a person rather than as a source of income. I hadn't told her what was happening, hadn't wanted to burden her with the knowledge that her mother was a criminal. But she deserved to know before everything exploded. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" Emily asked when she arrived at my house. She could always read me. "You sounded upset on the phone." "Sit down, sweetheart. I need to tell you something about your mother, and it's going to be difficult to hear." I told her everything. I showed her the evidence, the emails, the financial records. I watched her face transform from confusion to disbelief to horror to anger. "Mom is trying to have you locked up." Her voice shook. "She's been stealing from you? From your company?" "I'm afraid so." "And Damien is helping her?" "He's in it up to his neck." Emily stood up, pacing my study, her hands clenched into fists. "How could she do this? You gave her everything. You paid for her education, bought her house, gave her a position in the company she never earned. And this is how she repays you?" "I don't know, Emily. That's what I'm trying to understand." She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop her. And then I'm going to make sure she faces consequences for what she's done." "Does she know you know?" "Not yet. I'm telling her tomorrow night." "Can I be there?" I hesitated. "It might get ugly. She's my mother, and she's betraying you. She's betraying our whole family. I need to be there." I looked at my granddaughter, seeing Margaret's strength in her eyes, and nodded. "All right. But you stay quiet unless I ask you to speak. This is between me and Victoria." Friday evening arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of cold spring storm that turns Montana skies dark and ominous. It felt appropriate. Victoria and Damien arrived at 7, fashionably late as always. Emily was already there, waiting in the study. I had told Victoria the dinner would just be the 3 of us, so she was surprised to see her daughter. "Emily? What are you doing here?" "Grandpa invited me," Emily said coolly. "He said it was a family matter." I saw Victoria's eyes narrow, a flash of suspicion quickly suppressed. "Of course. The more the merrier." We gathered in the dining room, where Carlos had prepared an elaborate meal. Margaret's china was on the table, the good silver we only use for special occasions. I wanted everything to be perfect for this, my last meal as Victoria's father before I became her enemy. The conversation was strained. Victoria kept trying to steer things toward my retirement, dropping hints about how nice it would be for me to relax, to travel, to enjoy my golden years without the stress of running a company. "You've worked so hard for so long, Dad," she said, refilling her wine glass. "Don't you think it's time to let the younger generation take over?" "The younger generation," I repeated. "You mean you?" "Well, I am the primary heir. It would make sense for me to assume leadership." "And what about the board? What about the succession plan I've been developing?" Damien spoke up, emboldened by wine. "Come on, William. Everyone knows those board members are just placeholders. Victoria is your daughter. The company should be hers." "Should be hers," I said softly. Interesting choice of words. I set down my fork and looked at my daughter. She was beautiful, I realized, in the way Margaret had been beautiful. Strong features, intelligent eyes, good bone structure. But there was something hard in her expression that Margaret had never had, a coldness that must have come from me. "Victoria, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Of course, Dad. Do you love me? She blinked, caught off guard. What? Of course I love you. You're my father. Do you love me, or do you love my money? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Damien's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Emily sat up straighter, her hands gripping the table edge. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've been forging my signature on company documents. I'm talking about the $8 million you've embezzled. I'm talking about the insider trading, the stock manipulation, the conspiracy to have me declared mentally incompetent so you can steal everything I've built. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red. That's insane. I haven't done any of that. Don't lie to me. My voice was cold, controlled. I have the documents. I have the emails. I have everything, Victoria. Every forged signature, every illegal trade, every communication with your co-conspirators. I know about Patricia Morrison and Edward Chen. I know about the handwriting expert in Seattle. I know about your plans to have me committed to a care facility. Mom? Emily's voice was small, horrified. Tell him it's not true. But Victoria wasn't looking at Emily. She was looking at me, and the mask had finally dropped. What I saw underneath was ugly, a mixture of rage and calculation and something like panic. How long have you known? She asked. Long enough. Long enough to document everything, to make copies, to prepare my defense. Long enough to realize my own daughter is willing to destroy me for money. Damien stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We should go. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made him obey. We're not finished. Victoria was still staring at me, her mind clearly working through the implications. What are you going to do? That depends on you. I want to understand why. After everything I've given you, everything I've done for you, why would you do this? Everything you've given me? Victoria laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You want to talk about what you've given me? You gave me a childhood where I barely saw you. You gave me a mother who was always alone because her husband was married to his business. You gave me money, sure, lots of money, but you never gave me what I actually wanted. And what was that? Your respect. She was standing now, her voice rising. I've worked in that company for 15 years, Dad. 15 years. And you still treat me like I'm playing dress-up in your office. You never seriously considered me for any real position. You were going to give the company to a bunch of strangers on the board before you'd give it to me. Because you never earned it, I said quietly. You wanted the title without doing the work. You wanted the power without proving you were capable of wielding it. I am capable. I've been running circles around you for months. I've been moving money, manipulating stocks, building alliances, and you never even noticed until it was almost too late. You've been committing felonies. That's not capability, Victoria. That's criminality. It's the same skills, just different applications. You built your empire through aggressive business tactics, by outmaneuvering competitors, by exploiting every advantage. How is what I did any different? Because I never betrayed my family. I never forged documents or stole from people who trusted me. I never planned to have someone I loved locked away in a prison disguised as a care facility. Oh, please. Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. Don't act like you're some moral paragon. I've seen the deals you've made, the corners you've cut. The only difference between us is that you've been doing it longer. The difference between us, I said, standing up to face her, is that I built something. You're just trying to steal it. It should be mine. I'm your daughter. I'm your only child. Everything you have should come to me. Should. There's that word again. You feel entitled to something you haven't earned. I earned it by being your daughter. By putting up with your absence, your obsession with work, your inability to be a real father. This money, this company, it's compensation for the childhood you stole from me. Emily made a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. Mom, do you hear yourself? Grandpa gave you everything. He paid for my school, for our house, for every luxury we've ever had. And you're talking about stealing from him because he worked too much? You don't understand, Emily. You're too young. I understand that you're a thief and a liar. I understand that you were going to lock Grandpa away and steal everything he's worked for his entire life. Victoria turned on her daughter, her face ugly with rage. Don't you dare judge me. Everything I've done for us, for our future. No, Emily said, standing up. You did it for yourself. You did it because you're greedy and selfish and you can't stand that Grandpa built something you never could. Damien was inching toward the door, clearly wanting to flee, but I had positioned myself between him and the exit. You're not going anywhere, I said. We're going to finish this conversation. What do you want, Dad? Victoria asked, her voice suddenly tired. You've made your point. You caught us. So what now? Are you going to call the police? Drag your own daughter to prison? I should. What you've done is illegal in about 20 different ways. You could go to prison for years. But you won't. She sounded confident, and I realized she was still playing me, still believing that my love for her would override my sense of justice. Why wouldn't I? Because I'm your daughter. Because despite everything you still love me. Because calling the police would destroy the family, and that's the last thing Mom would have wanted. She was right. Margaret would have been devastated by all of this. She would have begged me to find a way to keep the family together, to forgive, to move on. But Margaret wasn't here. And Victoria had betrayed not just me, but Margaret's memory as well. You're right that I still love you, I said. But love doesn't mean allowing you to destroy me. And it doesn't mean protecting you from the consequences of your actions. So you're really going to do it? You're going to turn me in? I'm going to give you two choices. The first choice is that you and Damien confess everything. You return every penny you've stolen, you resign from the company, you cooperate with a full investigation, and you accept whatever legal consequences follow. If you do that, I'll ask the prosecutor for leniency. I'll testify on your behalf. I'll make sure Emily is taken care of financially, regardless of what happens to you. And the second choice? The second choice is that you refuse, and I send everything I have to the FBI, the SEC, and the local DA. I testify against you. I make sure you get the maximum sentence. And I make certain that everyone knows exactly what you did. Victoria stared at me for a long moment. You're bluffing. You never actually send your own daughter to prison. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Sarah, it's William. Yes, I need you to deliver the packages. All of them. Yes, I'm sure. Wait. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Wait, don't. Please. I held the phone away from my ear. Sarah, hold on a moment. I looked at Victoria. Are you ready to confess? If I do, what happens to me? That depends on the prosecutor and the judge. But I'll do what I can to help you. For Margaret's sake, if nothing else. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. I hate you, she whispered. I hate you so much. I know. But you're still going to do the right thing. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Victoria and Damien confessed everything to the authorities, cooperating with a full investigation in exchange for a plea deal. The DA, a woman named Jennifer Martinez who I had known professionally for years, was sympathetic but firm. Mr. Hartford, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and I respect your desire to show mercy to your daughter. But she's committed serious crimes. I can offer her a reduced sentence, but she will do time. I understand. Just, not too much time. She's misguided and greedy, but she's not violent. She's not a danger to anyone but herself. In the end, Victoria was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and insider trading. Damien got 6 years for his role in the conspiracy. Patricia Morrison and Edward Chin were forced to resign from the board and face their own criminal charges for accepting bribes and participating in the conspiracy. I made sure every penny of the stolen money was recovered. Some of it came from Victoria and Damien's assets, which I had frozen immediately. The rest came from the shell corporations and offshore accounts that Sarah's investigation uncovered. The company survived the scandal, though it was touch and go for a while. I gave several interviews explaining what had happened, taking full responsibility for not noticing what was occurring under my nose. The stock price took a hit, but I had weathered worse storms in my 50 years of business. Emily moved in with me after Victoria's sentencing. She was devastated by her mother's betrayal and imprisonment, but she was also stronger than I had given her credit for. She took a semester off from school to help me reorganize the company and implement new safeguards to prevent any future embezzlement. "I want to learn the business," she told me one evening as we sat in my study. "Really learn it from the ground up. Not like Mom did, expecting everything to be handed to her. I want to earn my place." "You don't have to do that, Emily. You can study whatever you want, be whatever you want." "I know. But I want this. I want to understand what you built, why it matters to you. And maybe someday, if I prove myself worthy, I can help you run it." I looked at my granddaughter and saw something I had never seen in Victoria: genuine interest, real determination, and most importantly, integrity. "All right," I said. "But we start at the bottom. You'll work in the warehouse first, learn how inventory and shipping works. Then we'll move you through every department. It'll take years." "Good," she said, smiling. "Anything worth having is worth working for." She sounded like Margaret. I visited Victoria once in prison, about 6 months after her sentencing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual expensive styling. "Why did you come?" she asked. "Because you're still my daughter. Because I wanted to see how you were doing." "How do you think I'm doing?" "I'm in prison because of you. You're in prison because of choices you made. But I'm still your father, and I still care what happens to you." She looked at me with something like wonder. "Even after everything?" "Even after everything. You're serving your time, paying your debt. When you get out, if you want to rebuild your life, I'll help you. But not with money, not with a job you haven't earned. With support, with guidance, with a chance to prove you've changed. I don't deserve that. No, you probably don't. But I'm giving it to you anyway. That's what family does." Victoria cried then, really cried, not the manipulative tears she had shed at our confrontation, but genuine sobs of remorse and shame. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know how I convinced myself that what I was doing was okay.